I'm Audrey Thompson, and I'm 32 years old. 3 hours ago, I walked into my father's dining room and watched my sister laugh in my face when I confronted her about stealing my inheritance. Grandma didn't know what she was doing when she left you that apartment, she said, not even bothering to look guilty. You never deserved any of it. The entire family just sat there, forks frozen halfway to their mouths, while she dismissed my dead grandmother's final wishes like they were a mistake to be corrected. I should have screamed. I should have thrown something. Instead, I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out without saying another word. Because here's the thing about growing up as the family scapegoat. You learn to keep your composure when everything inside you is burning. But what my sister doesn't know is that my lawyer called this morning with some very interesting news about those forged documents she used to sell Grandma's apartment. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to where this all started. Because trust me, tonight's dinner was just the grand finale of a lifetime of being treated like hired help by people who were supposed to love me. Growing up in the Thompson household was like living in a twisted fairy tale where I was somehow both Cinderella and the wicked stepsister rolled into one. My real mother died when I was 7, and within 18 months, Dad had remarried Sandra, a woman who came with her own daughter, Jessica, and a very clear vision of how our blended family would work. Spoiler alert, that vision didn't include treating both daughters equally. From day one, Sandra made it clear that Jessica was the princess and I was the help. While Jessica got dance lessons and designer clothes, I got a list of chores longer than my arm. While Jessica brought friends over for sleepovers, I was expected to clean up after them and then disappear upstairs so I wouldn't embarrass anyone with my presence. Dad, bless his conflict-avoiding heart, convinced himself this was normal. Sandra's just trying to establish structure, he'd say whenever I dared to complain. Jessica needs to feel secure in her new home. Apparently, my need to feel secure in the home I'd lived in my entire life was significantly less important. The worst part wasn't the obvious favoritism, it was the way they made me feel guilty for noticing it. Audrey's being dramatic again, became Sandra's favorite phrase whenever I pointed out the inequality. Some children just have a harder time adapting to change. By the time I was 16, I'd learned to keep my mouth shut and my expectations low. It was easier than fighting a battle I could never win. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school, when my guidance counselor called to discuss college applications. I was in the kitchen doing dishes, because of course I was, when I heard Sandra on the phone. "Oh, we're not really focused on college for Audrey," she said casually, as if she were discussing the weather. "She's more of a hands-on learner. We think she'd do better going straight into the workforce." Meanwhile, Jessica was already touring Ivy League campuses with a college fund that had mysteriously appeared when she turned 16. The same college fund that had supposedly been too tight to start for me when I'd asked about it the year before. That night, I called my grandmother. Grandma Ruth was my father's mother, and thank God she saw right through Sandra's act from the beginning. She lived in a beautiful rent-controlled apartment on the Upper West Side, the kind of place people would kill for in Manhattan, and she was the only person in my world who treated me like I mattered. "Honey," she said when I called her crying about the college conversation, "you pack a bag and come stay with me. We'll figure out the rest together." I don't think I'd ever moved so fast in my life. Within 2 hours, I was on a bus to the city with everything I owned stuffed into 2 duffel bags. Sandra tried to guilt me into staying. "After everything we've done for you," she said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, "this is how you repay us?" I looked around at the house where I'd spent 9 years being treated like an unpaid servant and said, "What exactly have you done for me besides provide a roof over my head in exchange for free labor?" Even Dad looked uncomfortable at that one. Living with Grandma was like stepping into an alternate universe where I actually had value. She helped me apply for financial aid, drove me to college interviews, and bragged about my accomplishments to anyone who would listen. When I got into community college with a partial scholarship, she cried happy tears and insisted on taking me shopping for dorm supplies. "You're going to do amazing things, Audrey," she told me as we loaded my new bedding into her car. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." For 2 years, Grandma's apartment was my sanctuary. We'd have coffee every morning before my classes, and she'd tell me stories about Dad when he was young, back before Sandra convinced him that showing favoritism was just good parenting. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you're finally finding your footing. I got accepted to a 4-year university upstate with a full scholarship. My grades and work-study experience had finally paid off. The catch was that I'd have to move 3 hours away from the only person who'd ever really been in my corner. "Go," Grandma said when I hesitated about accepting. This is your chance to build the life you deserve. I'll still be here when you need me. I should have known that was too good to be true. College was a revelation. Turns out, when you're not constantly walking on eggshells around people who resent your existence, you actually have brain space for things like learning and making friends. I threw myself into my studies, worked part-time at the campus bookstore, and for the first time in my life, felt like I was building something that belonged to me. Grandma and I talked every week. She'd update me on her neighborhood drama and her book club gossip, and I'd tell her about my classes and the boy I was dating. For 4 years, those phone calls were the highlight of my week. After graduation, I landed a job at a marketing firm in Rochester. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it was a 3-hour drive from both Grandma's apartment and Dad's house. Close enough to visit, far enough to maintain my sanity. I was 26, finally independent, and cautiously optimistic about my future. I should have known better than to let my guard down. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was at my desk, reviewing campaign proposals, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Audrey Thompson?" The voice was elderly, concerned. "Yes, this is Audrey." "Oh, honey, this is Margaret Walsh. I was your grandmother's neighbor. I'm so sorry to be the one calling you, but weren't you at the funeral yesterday?" My coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering against my desk as hot liquid spread across my papers. "What funeral?" The words came out as a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, sweetheart, Ruth passed away Sunday morning. The funeral was yesterday. I just assumed your whole family was there. Your father, that woman he married, your sister. I kept looking for you." The phone slipped from my numb fingers. My grandmother, my only real family, my biggest supporter, the one person who had ever chosen me, was dead, and no one had bothered to tell me. I sat in my cubicle, staring at my coffee-stained keyboard, while Margaret's voice continued from the floor where my phone had landed. My coworkers were starting to stare, but I couldn't seem to make my body move. "Miss Thompson?" Margaret was saying when I finally picked up the phone. "Are you still there?" "They didn't tell me," I managed. "No one called." "Oh, honey." The pain in her voice was almost worse than the news itself. "I am so sorry. Ruth talked about you constantly. She was so proud of you." "There's something else you need to know. There's going to be a reading of the will tomorrow at 2 o'clock. You should be there." I called in sick for the rest of the week. The drive to the city felt like moving through molasses. Everything too slow, too surreal, too final. I'd last spoken to Grandma just 2 weeks ago. She'd sounded tired but fine, excited about a new mystery novel her book club was reading. "Heart attack," Margaret explained when I stopped by her apartment. Quick and peaceful, the way Ruth would have wanted it. She'd been found by her doorman when she didn't come down for her morning walk. "She left you everything, you know," Margaret said, pressing a cup of tea into my shaking hands. "The apartment, her savings, everything. She used to say you were the only one who really saw her for who she was." The lawyer's office was a study in understated wealth, mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, and the kind of silence that money buys. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the waiting room, trying to process the fact that I was about to see my family for the first time since moving out 6 years ago. They walked in like they owned the place. Dad in his best suit, Sandra with her hair freshly done, and Jessica wearing what looked like designer everything. They saw me sitting there and exchanged a look that I recognized from childhood. The "oh right, she exists" look. "Audrey," Dad said, his voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't sure you'd make it." "Funny," I replied, standing up slowly. "I wasn't sure I'd be invited, considering no one told me she died." Sandra's face flushed slightly, but she rallied quickly. "We tried calling your old number, but it was disconnected. We assumed you'd moved on from staying in touch." Lie. My number hadn't changed in 3 years, and they all had it. "Right," I said. "My mistake for assuming someone would want to let me know my grandmother was dead. Have you ever experienced a betrayal so deep it felt like drowning? Drop a comment and let me know how you handled family members who systematically excluded you from major life events. You're not going to believe what happened when the lawyer started reading that will." The reading itself was swift and brutal. Grandma had been thorough. She'd left me the apartment, her entire savings account, her jewelry, her books, everything. The only mention of Dad was a small personal item, his father's watch, with a note about hoping he'd remember the man his father had been. Jessica got nothing. Sandra got nothing. And neither of them looked surprised. "She was losing her mental faculties," Sandra said immediately after the lawyer finished reading. "This will can't possibly be valid. Ruth barely knew what day it was the last few months." The lawyer, a dignified man in his 60s, looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Thompson, I can assure you that Mrs. Thompson was completely lucid when she revised this will 18 months ago. She was very specific about her intentions. 18 months ago. Right around the time I'd called Grandma crying about how Dad had forgotten my birthday, but thrown Jessica a surprise party the week before. This is ridiculous, Jessica said, speaking up for the first time. Audrey hasn't even been part of the family for years. She doesn't deserve any of this. Deserve. There was that word again. The word that had shaped my entire childhood, weaponized by people who thought love was something you earned through submission and silence. I looked at Jessica. 24 years old, college-educated on Dad's dime, never worked a day in her life because Daddy's credit card covered everything, and felt something shift inside my chest. Something that felt suspiciously like backbone. You're right, I said quietly. I haven't been part of the family for years. Because every time I tried to be, you made it clear I wasn't welcome. That's not true, Dad protested, but he couldn't meet my eyes. Isn't it? I stood up, gathering the papers the lawyer had given me. When was the last time any of you called me? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? When was the last time you included me in anything? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Grandma knew exactly what she was doing when she made this will. I continued. She left everything to the one person who actually spent time with her. The one person who visited, who called, who cared whether she was lonely or happy, or needed anything. I walked toward the door, then turned back. And by the way, Sandra, the apartment is mine now, which means I have access to all of Grandma's financial records, including the rent checks Dad's been sending her every month for the past 6 years. Sandra's face went white. That's right, I said, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. I know about the money. I know Dad's been supporting her, which makes your sudden concern about her mental state particularly interesting, doesn't it? I left them sitting there in stunned silence and walked out into the bright October afternoon feeling lighter than I had in years. The feeling lasted exactly until I got back to Grandma's apartment, my apartment now, and discovered that the landlord had a notice posted on the door. Sale pending, it read. New ownership takes possession November 1st. My hands shook as I called the number on the notice. The apartment was being sold by the current owner of record, one Jessica Thompson, who had provided all the necessary documentation to prove her inheritance rights. The same Jessica who had just sat in that lawyer's office learning that she hadn't inherited anything. My phone was already ringing before I'd fully processed what I was looking at. The number on the screen belonged to my family's lawyer. Miss Thompson, his voice was grave. We need to talk, immediately. The attorney's office felt different this time. Smaller, more cramped, like the walls were closing in. Mr. Williams, the estate lawyer, had asked me to come in immediately after I'd called him about the sale notice. I'm afraid we have a significant problem, he said, spreading documents across his desk. Someone has forged your grandmother's signature on a property transfer document dated 6 months ago. According to these papers, your grandmother supposedly signed over ownership of the apartment to Jessica Thompson before she died. I stared at the paperwork, my vision blurring around the edges. That's impossible. Grandma would have told me if she was selling the apartment. We talked every week. The signature is quite good, Mr. Williams admitted, but there are several red flags. The handwriting analysis will take a few days, but I can tell you right now that the notary stamp is fake. The supposed witness signature belongs to someone who was out of the country on the date this was allegedly signed. So what does this mean? It means your sister has committed multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, forgery, and given the value of the property, grand larceny. He leaned back in his chair. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about Jessica in that lawyer's office, her entitled attitude, her assumption that she deserved everything simply by virtue of being Dad's favorite. I thought about all the times she'd sabotaged job interviews for me by forgetting to pass along messages. I thought about the boyfriend she'd stolen in high school just because she could. I want to prosecute, I said. All of it. Mr. Williams nodded approvingly. Good. But first we need to stop this sale. The buyers are legitimate. They have no idea they're purchasing stolen property. I'll file an emergency injunction this afternoon. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of legal documents and phone calls. The sale was halted pending investigation. The handwriting analysis came back confirming what we already knew. The signature was forged. The police were notified. And then came the calls from my family. Dad first, his voice tight with stress. Audrey, we need to talk about this misunderstanding with the apartment. Misunderstanding? I almost laughed. Dad, Jessica forged Grandma's signature and tried to steal my inheritance. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime. She made a mistake. She was emotional about Grandma's death, not thinking clearly. Surely we can work this out within the family. The way we worked out, including me and the funeral? Silence. Sandra called next, her voice dripping with fake concern. Audrey, honey, I know you're upset about not being told about the funeral. That was a miscommunication. But surely you don't want to send your own sister to jail over a property dispute. Watch me, I said, and hung up. Jessica herself didn't call until the third day, and when she did, all pretense of family unity disappeared. You vindictive bitch, she hissed into the phone. You always were jealous of me, and now you're using this as an excuse to destroy my life. I'm not destroying anything, I replied calmly. You destroyed your own life when you decided to commit felony fraud. I needed that money. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to live in this city? Some of us can't just run away and pretend we don't have family obligations. Family obligations? The irony was so thick I could taste it. Like the obligation to tell me when our grandmother died? Like the obligation to include me in family events? Like the obligation to treat me like I actually belonged? You never belonged, she screamed. You were always weird and awkward and too sensitive. Mom tried to help you fit in, but you just kept whining about everything being unfair. And there it was. The truth she'd been holding back for years, finally spoken out loud. You're right, I said quietly. I never belonged, because you all made sure I knew I wasn't welcome. But here's the thing. Jessica, Grandma knew that too. That's why she left everything to me. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Margaret called me afterward, her voice breathless with excitement. Honey, there were police cars outside the building all morning. They arrested that girl, your sister, right in the lobby. She was screaming about how this was all a mistake and demanding to call her father. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt empty, like I'd won a war that never should have needed fighting. The arraignment was a circus. Dad had hired an expensive lawyer who spent 45 minutes arguing that this was a family dispute that had gotten out of hand, not a criminal matter. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s, calmly presented evidence of multiple felonies and pointed out that the defendant had shown no remorse and had, in fact, continued to claim ownership of the stolen property even after being confronted with proof of the forgery. Jessica was released on bail, but the message was clear. This was going to trial. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Dad called me that afternoon, his voice shaking with rage. I hope you're proud of yourself, he said. Your sister is facing 5 years in prison because you couldn't be the bigger person and work this out privately. I could be the bigger person, I replied, but I'm tired of being the smaller one. Jessica made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. She's your sister. No, I said firmly. She's your daughter. She stopped being my sister the day she decided I didn't deserve basic human decency. If you go through with this prosecution, you're no longer welcome in this family. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. Dad, I said softly, I haven't been welcome in this family since I was 7 years old. You're not taking anything away from me that I ever actually had. He hung up without another word. Sandra's approach was different, but equally predictable. She showed up at my workplace, my actual job, not the family drama, the next day, making a scene in the lobby about how I was destroying an innocent girl's life. Jessica made one mistake. She pleaded loudly enough for everyone to hear. One moment of poor judgment, and you're ruining her entire future. Is this really what your grandmother would have wanted? My grandmother, I said clearly, walking toward the elevator while she followed me, wanted me to have her apartment and her savings. That's why she left them to me in a legal will. What she didn't want was for someone to forge her signature and steal them. You always were vindictive, Sandra said, her voice rising. Even as a child, you held grudges. This is just revenge because Jessica was always prettier and more popular than you. The elevator doors opened, revealing a car full of my coworkers. The entire lobby had gone quiet, listening to Sandra's performance. You're right, I said, stepping into the elevator and turning to face her. This is absolutely revenge. Revenge for 25 years of being treated like garbage by people who were supposed to love me. Thanks for finally being honest about it. The doors closed on her shocked face. My boss called me into her office an hour later. I was sure I was about to be fired for bringing personal drama to work, but instead, Angela Martinez looked at me with something that might have been respect. That woman claims to be your stepmother, she said. Unfortunately, that's accurate. She seems to think you're making a mistake prosecuting your sister. My sister forged my dead grandmother's signature to steal my inheritance. I'm not sure what mistake I could be making by refusing to let her get away with it. Angela nodded slowly. Good. For a minute there, I thought I might have misjudged your character. How long has your family been treating you like this? Since I was 7. And you've been supporting yourself since college? Yes. Working full-time while getting your degree? Yes. Building a career, paying your own bills, handling your own problems? Yes. Angela leaned back in her chair. Then let me tell you something, Audrey. The woman screaming in my lobby is not your family. Your family is the people who support your success, celebrate your achievements, and have your back when things get tough. That woman is just someone who shares your last name. It was the first time anyone had ever validated what I'd always known, but never dared to say out loud. There's something else, Angela continued. We've been looking for someone to head up our new Rochester branch. It would mean a promotion, a significant salary increase, and most importantly, it would mean getting you out of a city where people can show up at your workplace to harass you. The offer was generous. More than generous. It was a lifeline disguised as a career opportunity. When would you need an answer? Take your time. The position doesn't officially open until after the holidays. That should give you time to resolve your legal situation and figure out what you want your future to look like. That night, alone in my new apartment, Grandma's apartment, which was officially mine again thanks to the injunction, I sat on her old couch and tried to imagine what my life could look like if I actually put myself first for once. The phone rang. Mr. Williams calling with an update. Jessica's lawyer wants to negotiate a plea deal, he said. They're offering to plead guilty to a misdemeanor in exchange for paying restitution and avoiding jail time. What does that mean for me? It means you get your property back, you get compensation for your legal fees, and she avoids prison. But it also means she doesn't face real consequences for what she did. I thought about Jessica's complete lack of remorse, her assumption that she could steal from me and face no real consequences because family doesn't prosecute family. What would you recommend? Honestly, take it to trial. She committed serious crimes, and she's shown no indication that she understands the gravity of what she did. A slap on the wrist just teaches her that she can get away with anything as long as she cries loud enough afterward. Then that's what we'll do. I hung up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my family was probably having an emergency meeting about how to deal with their vindictive daughter-stepdaughter, who had the audacity to expect consequences for theft. For the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought of me. It felt like freedom. The trial was scheduled for February, which gave me 3 months to get used to the idea that I was about to publicly air my family's dirty laundry in front of a judge and jury. 3 months to deal with the constant calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly concerned about family unity and forgiveness. The holidays were particularly brutal. Christmas came and went without a word from Dad, Sandra, or Jessica. I spent it alone in Grandma's apartment, going through her things and trying to decide what to keep and what to donate. I found photo albums full of pictures of me. School plays, graduation, college orientation day, all carefully labeled with dates and little notes about how proud she was. Hidden in the back of her jewelry box, I found a letter addressed to me. My dearest Audrey, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're dealing with the aftermath of my will. I want you to know that every decision I made was deliberate. I've watched your father let that woman and her daughter treat you terribly for years, and I've watched you handle it with a grace I'm not sure I could have managed. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing every slight, every exclusion, every moment of favoritism she'd witnessed over the years. She'd been keeping track, documenting the pattern of abuse that I'd learned to accept as normal. You deserved better, the letter concluded. You always deserved better. Don't let them convince you that wanting basic respect and fairness makes you the problem. You're not the problem, sweetheart. You never were. I cried for 3 hours after reading it, mourning not just Grandma, but the validation I'd needed my entire life and had finally received too late. The week before the trial, Jessica's lawyer made one final plea offer. She'd admit to misunderstanding the inheritance situation, pay me back for my legal fees, and promise to stay away from me permanently. In exchange, all charges would be dropped. She's scared, Mr. Williams explained when he called with the offer. Her lawyer knows we have an airtight case. This is desperation. Good, I said. She should be scared. She committed multiple felonies and thought her daddy would make it all go away. So we're proceeding to trial? We're proceeding to trial. What do you think will happen when Audrey finally gets her day in court? Drop your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up to family members who thought they could walk all over you. The courtroom showdown is about to get very interesting. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence. The forged documents, the handwriting analysis, the fake notary stamps, Testimony from witnesses who could prove Jessica wasn't where she claimed to be when the papers were supposedly signed. Jessica's defense was exactly what I'd expected. She was grieving, she was confused. She thought Grandma had promised her the apartment. It was all just a big misunderstanding. The prosecutor demolished that defense with one simple question. If you believed your grandmother had left you the apartment, why didn't you wait for the will to be read before putting it up for sale? Jessica's answer, that she needed the money immediately for personal expenses, pretty much sealed her fate. But the moment that really drove home the dysfunction of my family came when Dad testified as a character witness for Jessica. Under oath, he painted a picture of Jessica as a loving, devoted granddaughter who had spent years caring for Grandma while I lived selfishly far away. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Thompson, when did your daughter Jessica last visit your mother before her death? I'm not sure of the exact date. Would it surprise you to learn that the doorman's visitor logs show Jessica visited exactly 3 times in the 2 years before Mrs. Thompson's death? That doesn't sound right. And would it surprise you to learn that those same logs show your daughter Audrey visited 47 times during that same period? In fact, isn't it true that Audrey was the only family member who maintained regular contact with your mother? Audrey lived closer. Audrey lived in Rochester, New York. That's a 3-hour drive. Jessica lived 20 minutes away by subway. Which daughter do you think showed more commitment to maintaining a relationship with your mother? Dad couldn't answer that one. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the foreman read the verdict with satisfying clarity. Guilty on all counts. Jessica was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution for my legal fees and the costs associated with stopping the fraudulent sale. But the real satisfaction came afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, when Dad approached me one last time. "I hope you're happy," he said, his voice bitter. "You've destroyed this family." I looked at him, this man who had chosen his wife's comfort over his daughter's well-being for 25 years, and felt nothing but pity. "Dad," I said quietly, "this family destroyed itself a long time ago. I just stopped pretending it hadn't." 6 months later, I was settling into my new life as the Rochester branch manager for Angela's marketing firm. The promotion had come with a significant salary increase, a company car, and most importantly, the kind of professional respect I'd never experienced before. The apartment sold for more than Grandma's estate lawyer had estimated. After paying off my student loans and legal fees, I had enough left over for a down payment on a house. My own house, chosen by me, paid for with my own money. Jessica served 14 months of her sentence. I know this because she wrote me letters from prison, letters that started with apologies and gradually devolved into the same entitled rage she'd always shown when she didn't get her way. "You could have stopped this," her final letter read. "You could have dropped the charges at any time, but you chose to be vindictive. I'll never forgive you for this." I didn't respond. Some people never learn that actions have consequences, and Jessica was clearly one of them. The real surprise came from an unexpected source. About a year after the trial, I got a call from my father's sister, Aunt Marie, whom I hadn't spoken to since I was a teenager. "Audrey," she said, "I owe you an apology. I heard about what happened with Jessica and the apartment, and I need you to know that your grandmother talked to me about changing her will months before she did it." "She did?" "She was worried about how your father was letting Sandra and Jessica treat you. She said she wanted to make sure you knew that at least one person in the family saw your worth." Aunt Marie went on to explain that several family members had known about the favoritism over the years, but had stayed quiet to avoid conflict. "We thought it was better to keep the peace," she admitted. "But watching Jessica get sentenced for trying to steal from you made us realize that our silence enabled a lot of this behavior. It was too little, too late, but at least it was honest. The best part of my new life wasn't the financial security or the professional success. It was the peace. I woke up every morning in my own house, went to a job where my contributions were valued, and came home to silence that was comfortable instead of oppressive. I dated a little, made some new friends, joined a book club that reminded me of the evenings I'd spent with Grandma discussing mystery novels. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't walking on eggshells or trying to earn love that would never be freely given. The final piece of closure came 2 years after the trial, when I received an unexpected visitor at my office. "Ms. Thompson?" My assistant knocked on my office door. "There's a Sandra Thompson here to see you. She says she's your stepmother." I hadn't seen Sandra since her dramatic performance in my old office lobby, but I was curious enough about what she wanted to agree to the meeting. She looked older, more worn down. The perfectly coiffed hair was showing gray roots, and her designer clothes looked like they'd seen better days. "Audrey," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk uninvited. You look well. I am well. What do you want, Sandra? I wanted to apologize for how things ended between us. I know you feel like we treated you unfairly, and I can see how it might have seemed that way from your perspective. From my perspective. Even in her apology, she couldn't admit actual wrongdoing. Is there something specific you need? I asked. Well, since you ask, Jessica is having a hard time finding work with her criminal record. I was hoping you might be able to help her get a fresh start. Maybe a position at your company, or a reference for somewhere else. I stared at her for a long moment, amazed by the sheer audacity. Sandra, your daughter tried to steal my inheritance. She forged my dead grandmother's signature and attempted to sell property that didn't belong to her. And you want me to help her get a job? She made a mistake, Sandra said defensively. She's learned her lesson. Has she? Because the last letter I got from her didn't sound particularly repentant. Sandra's composure slipped slightly. She's struggling, Audrey. She can't find decent work. She's living in a studio apartment in Queens. She's having trouble making ends meet. And that's supposed to be my problem because she's family. The word hung between us like a weapon Sandra thought she could still wield. No, I said quietly. She's not. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't forge signatures and commit fraud. Family doesn't stand by while other family members are treated like garbage for 25 years. I stood up, indicating the meeting was over. Jessica made her choices. She chose to commit crimes instead of getting a job. She chose to try to steal from me instead of building her own life. She chose to blame me for the consequences of her actions instead of taking responsibility for them. Sandra stood as well, her face flushed with anger. You always were a cold, heartless girl. I was a girl who wanted to be loved by her family, I corrected. But I'm a woman who's learned that some people aren't capable of love, only manipulation. Thanks for reminding me why cutting ties with you all was the best decision I ever made. After she left, I sat in my office for a few minutes, waiting for the familiar guilt to wash over me. The guilt that had been my constant companion for years, the voice that told me I was being too sensitive, too demanding, too ungrateful for the scraps of affection thrown my way. But the guilt didn't come. Instead, I felt something that had taken me years to recognize. Pride. Pride in standing up for myself. Pride in refusing to accept mistreatment. Pride in building a life where I was valued and respected. 3 years post-trial, my life had developed a rhythm that felt luxurious in its simplicity. Work that challenged me, a home that was truly mine, relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I'd even started dating someone, David, a financial advisor I'd met through the book club. He was kind, funny, and refreshingly uninterested in drama. The first time he asked about my family, I gave him the edited version. We're not close. Different values, different priorities. He nodded and dropped the subject, which should have been my first clue that he was exactly the kind of person I'd been waiting my whole life to meet. But the past has a way of catching up with you, even when you think you've successfully outrun it. I was at the grocery store on a Saturday morning when I heard a familiar voice in the next aisle over. Audrey? Audrey Thompson? I turned to find myself face to face with my high school boyfriend Marcus, whom I hadn't seen in over 15 years. He looked good. Older, obviously, but successful and happy. Marcus, wow, how are you? I'm great. Married, 2 kids, living the suburban dream. He grinned. I heard through the grapevine about what happened with your sister and the inheritance thing. That was wild. I was surprised news had traveled that far. Grapevine? My cousin works with your dad's company. Said the whole family kind of imploded after Jessica went to prison. This was news to me. What do you mean, imploded? Marcus looked uncomfortable, like he'd said more than he intended. Oh, divorce, business problems, the usual family drama stuff. I probably shouldn't have brought it up, but now I was curious. After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Against my better judgment, I found myself Googling Dad's name when I got home. The search results were illuminating. Dad's small accounting firm had lost several major clients in the past year. There were mentions of family legal troubles affecting his professional reputation. Most surprisingly, there was a divorce filing from 8 months ago. Dad and Sandra were getting divorced. I should have felt satisfaction, some kind of vindication that their perfect little family had cracked under pressure. Instead, I felt nothing but a distant sort of sadness for the waste of it all. David found me at my laptop that evening, scrolling through public records with the dedication of a private investigator. Everything okay? He asked, settling onto the couch beside me. My stepmother and father are getting divorced, I said. According to this, she filed and cited irreconcilable differences and financial irresponsibility. I take it this is someone you're not close to? I closed the laptop and turned to face him. David, I need to tell you something about my family. It's not pretty, and it's not simple, and it might change how you see me. Okay, he said simply. I'm listening. So I told him everything. Growing up as the unwanted stepdaughter, being treated like hired help, Jessica's sabotage and entitlement, the stolen inheritance, the trial, the complete breakdown of all family relationships. I expected him to look uncomfortable, maybe suggest that there had to be two sides to every story. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment after I finished. That explains a lot, he said finally. What do you mean? You apologize for everything, even when you haven't done anything wrong. You act surprised when I do nice things for you, like you don't expect to be treated well. And you're incredibly independent, which isn't bad, but sometimes it seems like you're afraid to need anyone. He wasn't wrong. Does that bother you? It doesn't bother me, but it makes me sad. Because you're amazing, Audrey. You're intelligent and funny and kind, and the fact that your own family couldn't see that says everything about them and nothing about you. It was exactly what I needed to hear and exactly what I'd never expected to receive. There's something else, I said. My father's business is apparently struggling. Part of me wonders if he'll try to reach out, now that Sandra's gone and Jessica's not around to influence his decisions. Would you want him to? I don't know, maybe. He wasn't always terrible. Before Sandra, he was actually a pretty good dad. But he chose her over me for so many years. People change, David said carefully. But they also don't. If he does reach out, you get to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want to have. You don't owe him anything just because he's your biological father. 2 weeks later, as if he'd been reading my mind, Dad called. I stared at his name on my phone screen for a full minute before answering. Hi, Dad. Audrey. His voice sounded older, tired. I know I don't have the right to call you after everything that's happened, but I was hoping we could talk. About what? About how badly I screwed up. About how sorry I am. About whether there's any chance you might be willing to give me another opportunity to be the father I should have been all along. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of my life. Not because he was angry or defensive, but because he was completely brutally honest about his failures. I knew Sandra wasn't fair to you, he admitted. I knew Jessica was jealous and cruel. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really I was just taking the easy way out. It was easier to let you absorb the dysfunction than to deal with the conflict that would have come from standing up for you. Why are you calling now? I asked. Because your marriage fell apart and Jessica's in prison and you're finally realizing what you lost? Yes, he said simply. That's exactly why I'm calling. I lost my business, my wife, my other daughter, and my self-respect. But the thing I regret most is losing you because you were the only one worth keeping. I didn't give Dad an answer right away. Instead, I asked for time to think about it, and to my surprise, he agreed without argument or pressure. I know I don't deserve a second chance, he said, but if you're ever willing to try, I'll be here. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to slam the door on any possibility of reconciliation. After all, he'd had 25 years to choose me and had consistently chosen Sandra and Jessica instead. But another part of me, the part that remembered the father he'd been before his second marriage, wondered if there was something worth salvaging. David was supportive but neutral. This is your decision, he said. I'll support whatever you choose, but I don't want you to do it because you feel obligated. I called Aunt Marie, who had become something of a sounding board for family-related decisions. Your father's been calling family members, she told me, apologizing for how he handled things with you, asking if anyone thinks you might be willing to see him. He seems genuinely remorseful. Do you think he means it? I think. Losing everything gave him some perspective he should have had years ago. But Audrey, you don't owe him forgiveness just because he's finally figured out he was wrong. In the end, I decided to meet with him, but on my terms, in my city, with clear boundaries about what I was and wasn't willing to discuss. We met at a coffee shop near my office on a Thursday afternoon. He looked older than I'd expected, grayer and more worn down. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and khakis that had seen better days. You look good, he said when I sat down across from him. Happy. I am happy. It took me a while to get here, but I finally built a life I'm proud of. I'm glad. I know I don't have the right to be proud of you after being absent for so much of your success, but I am. Your grandmother used to brag about your achievements to anyone who would listen. She said you were going to do great things. She was the only one who believed that. Dad flinched. I believed it too. I just did a terrible job of showing it. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about the divorce, about losing clients when news of Jessica's trial reached his professional network. about the realization that he'd spent years enabling destructive behavior instead of addressing it. Sandra left me for her trainer, he said with a bitter laugh. Turns out she was having an affair for the past 3 years. The irony is that I spent so much time trying to keep her happy that I drove away the one person who actually cared about me. I did care about you, I said. For a long time. But caring about someone doesn't mean accepting mistreatment from them. I know that now. I'm in therapy, trying to figure out how I became the kind of man who would choose keeping the peace over protecting his daughter. The conversation was honest, painful, and exhausting. By the end of it, we'd established some basic ground rules. We could try to rebuild a relationship, but it would be gradual. And it would be based on his actions, not his words. He would not contact me about Jessica or try to rope me into helping with her problems. And if he ever chose someone else's comfort over my well-being again, that would be the end of any relationship between us. I understand, he said. And Audrey, thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it. 6 months later, we were having regular phone calls and occasional dinners. It wasn't the father-daughter relationship I'd dreamed of as a child, but it was something real and honest and built on mutual respect. Dad had started his own small practice, and for the first time in years, he seemed genuinely at peace with his choices. The real test came when Jessica was released from prison. She'd served her full sentence minus time off for good behavior, and according to Dad, she was struggling to readjust to life outside. She'd asked him to reach out to me about the possibility of meeting to apologize and try to make amends. What did you tell her? I asked during one of our weekly phone calls. I told her that any contact with you would have to go through you directly, and that she shouldn't expect anything from you just because she's ready to apologize. I also told her that if she contacts you and you're not interested in hearing from her, she needs to respect that boundary. It was exactly the right answer. The answer the old dad never would have given because it prioritized my comfort over Jessica's desires. 2 days later, I received a letter from Jessica. It was 3 pages long, handwritten, and much more thoughtful than I'd expected. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did and why I did it, she wrote. I was jealous of you for most of our childhood, but I convinced myself that you were the problem, that you were too sensitive, too needy, too difficult to love. It was easier than admitting that I was scared of having to share attention and resources. The letter went on to detail specific instances of her sabotage and cruelty, acknowledging the pain she'd caused and taking full responsibility for her choices. She didn't ask for forgiveness or a relationship. She simply wanted me to know that she understood, finally, what she'd done. I don't expect you to want a relationship with me, the letter concluded. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I was wrong. You deserved better from all of us, and I'm sorry it took me going to prison to figure that out. I read the letter 3 times before deciding what to do with it. In the end, I wrote back, not to offer forgiveness or reconciliation, but to acknowledge her effort and to make one thing clear. I was glad she'd found some peace with her choices, but I had no interest in having her in my life going forward. I hope you build a good life for yourself, I wrote. But that life doesn't include me, and I need you to respect that. She never wrote back, which told me everything I needed to know about whether her change of heart was genuine. David proposed on the 2-year anniversary of our first date, in the same bookstore where we'd met during book club. It was simple, perfect, and completely free of the drama that had characterized my family relationships for so long. I love that you know exactly who you are, he said when he got down on one knee in the mystery section. I love that you don't apologize for taking up space in the world. I love that you've built a life that makes you happy, and I love that you're willing to let me be part of it. The wedding planning process was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was making decisions based purely on what David and I wanted, without having to consider anyone else's feelings or manage anyone else's drama. Dad asked if he could walk me down the aisle, and after some consideration, I said yes. But I made it clear that the wedding was going to be small, intimate, and focused on celebrating our future, rather than obligating anyone from our respective pasts. What about Jessica? He asked carefully when we were going over the guest list. What about her? I know you said you don't want a relationship with her, but she is your sister. Some people might expect— Dad, I interrupted gently. This is exactly the kind of thinking that got us into trouble before. Jessica is not invited to my wedding. She's not part of my life, and other people's expectations about family obligations don't factor into my decisions anymore. He nodded, and I could see him actively choosing to support my boundary rather than push for a different outcome. It was a small moment, but it represented years of growth for both of us. The wedding was everything I'd wanted it to be: intimate, joyful, and completely drama-free. 40 guests, an outdoor ceremony at a beautiful vineyard, and a reception that felt more like a dinner party with our favorite people than a formal event. Grandma would have loved it. During the reception, as I was talking to some of David's colleagues, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Dad was speaking quietly but firmly to someone I couldn't see, his body language clearly indicating that whoever it was needed to leave. A few minutes later, he approached me discreetly. "Jessica showed up," he said quietly. "I told her she wasn't invited and asked her to leave. She did, but I wanted you to know." The old me would have been upset that she'd tried to insert herself into my special day. The new me felt nothing but gratitude that Dad had handled the situation without involving me, and that Jessica had respected his request to leave. "Thank you," I said, "for handling that and for not making it my problem." "That's what family does," he replied. "They protect each other." It was a lesson he'd learned far too late, but at least he'd learned it. Later that night, as David and I were staying at the Vineyard's honeymoon suite, I got a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your wedding. I saw the photos on Dad's Facebook. You looked beautiful and happy. I'm glad you found someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. Jay." I showed the text to David, who read it without comment. "How do you feel about her reaching out?" he asked. "Honestly, nothing. I feel nothing. She's become a stranger who shares some of my history, but she's not part of my present or my future." That's probably the healthiest response you could have. He was right. For years, the thought of Jessica had generated anger, hurt, resentment, all the emotions that come with betrayal and mistreatment. But somewhere along the way, those feelings had faded, replaced by simple indifference. I had built a life I loved, surrounded by people who valued me. Jessica's approval or disapproval, her presence or absence, her attempts at reconciliation or continued hostility, none of it mattered anymore because I had everything I needed without her. It was the ultimate freedom. Not needing revenge, not craving apology, not wanting anything at all from someone who had spent years trying to diminish me. I deleted the text without responding and turned off my phone. 5 years into my marriage, David and I had settled into a life that felt almost impossibly peaceful compared to the chaos of my early years. We'd bought a house with a garden, adopted a rescue dog named Chester, and fallen into routines that brought us both joy. I'd been promoted again, this time to regional manager overseeing 3 offices across upstate New York. Dad and I maintained a steady, honest relationship built on clear boundaries and mutual respect. And most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment about who deserved a place in my life. The final chapter of the Jessica saga came in the form of a phone call from a lawyer I'd never heard of. "Ms. Morrison?" The voice was professional, slightly hesitant. "My name is Robert Chen, and I'm calling regarding your sister, Jessica Thompson." My blood ran cold. "Is she dead?" No, nothing like that. She's asked me to contact you regarding a financial matter. She's apparently in some legal trouble and was hoping you might be willing to help with her attorney fees." I was quiet for so long that Mr. Chen asked if I was still there. "I'm here," I said finally. "What kind of legal trouble? Identity theft, credit card fraud, forgery? It seems she's been using other people's information to obtain credit and make purchases. The amount is significant enough that she's facing federal charges." Of course she was. Some people never learn. "Mr. Chen," I said carefully, "what exactly did Jessica tell you about our relationship?" "She said you were estranged due to a family misunderstanding, but that you're financially successful and might be willing to help family in a crisis." "Did she mention that the family misunderstanding was her forging our grandmother's signature to steal my inheritance, and that she spent 14 months in prison for fraud and identity theft?" The silence on the other end was telling. "I see," Mr. Chen said finally. "I think I may have been given incomplete information about the situation." "You think?" "Let me be very clear. Jessica and I have no relationship. I will not be helping with her legal fees, her living expenses, or anything else. If she contacts you again about reaching out to me, please tell her that any further attempts to involve me in her problems will result in a restraining order." "I understand. I apologize for bothering you." "Mr. Chen, give her some advice from someone who knows her well. She needs to stop looking for other people to rescue her from the consequences of her choices. She's 31 years old. It's time she learned to save herself." After I hung up, I called Dad to give him a heads up about Jessica's latest legal troubles. "I'm not surprised," he said sadly. "She called me last month asking for money, claimed she was behind on rent. I told her I couldn't help. I'm finally in a good place financially, and I'm not going to jeopardize that by enabling her again." "Good for you." I learned that lesson the hard way. Enabling destructive behavior isn't love, it's cowardice. And I spent too many years being a coward. That evening, David found me sitting in our garden, Chester's head in my lap as I absently scratched behind his ears. "Penny for your thoughts?" he said, settling into the chair beside me. I told him about the lawyer's call and Jessica's latest legal troubles. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Tired," I said honestly. Not angry or hurt or vindictive, just tired of her assuming she can keep making the same mistakes and expecting other people to bail her out. She'll probably figure it out eventually. Or she won't. Either way, it's not your problem. "That's what I love about you," I said, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "You never try to convince me that I owe people more than I actually owe them. That's what love should be. Supporting your judgment, not questioning your boundaries." As we sat there watching the sunset, I thought about the girl I'd been at 7 years old, crying because her new stepmother had made it clear she wasn't wanted. I thought about the teenager who'd accepted being treated like hired help because she didn't know she deserved better. I thought about the young woman who'd almost let her family convince her that wanting basic respect was asking too much. And I thought about the woman I'd become, successful, loved, surrounded by people who saw my worth and celebrated my achievements. A woman who had learned that sometimes the most radical act of self-love is simply refusing to accept mistreatment. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Marie. "Saw the news about Jessica's arrest online. Hope you're doing okay." I typed back, "I'm doing great. Living my best life with people who actually value me." "That's exactly what you deserve," she replied. She was right. It was exactly what I deserved, and exactly what I'd finally learned to demand. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Remember, family isn't just about blood. It's about love, respect, and support. And you have every right to build your own family with people who treat you like you matter. 6 months later, I got word through Dad that Jessica had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. I felt the same thing I'd felt when I heard about her first arrest. Nothing. She had become completely irrelevant to my happiness, which was the best possible outcome for both of us. I never did hear from her again after that wedding text, and I never reached out either. Some stories don't have dramatic endings or tearful reconciliations. Sometimes the most powerful ending is simply the absence of drama, the presence of peace, and the knowledge that you chose yourself when no one else would. And as I sit here in my beautiful life, surrounded by love and respect and genuine family, the family I chose and who chose me back, I can honestly say that I wouldn't change a single thing about how it all turned out, because the girl who was never enough for them became a woman who was more than enough for herself. And that, it turns out, was always the point.